I hear you've come for the tea. Here you go. Take a little slurp. Hello, my name's Lena, and much to the surprise of the internet, I got married recently. And surprise is there because a few years ago, not a few years ago, I made a video talking about all of the reasons why I wasn't getting married. And 209,000 people saw that video. So I thought I owed it to myself. Actually, I don't owe it to anyone, but I felt like it. I thought it would be funny to react to that video and talk a little bit about why my opinions might not have changed or why they have changed in certain ways. So we're going to watch the video together and see what we think. I will be honest and say I haven't actually watched this video since it came out. I do remember doing a lot of research for this video, so some of it will probably be still familiar to me, but let's see how I feel now. Let's go.
Since my plans got cancelled, fancy another episode of the 20s Toolkit. Yeah, wicked. Let's just keep moving, hurry up.
So, some people in the comments didn't get this concept. I'm supposed to be a runaway bride. However, in the Midlands, the hills aren't that dramatic. So to get the effect of disappearing behind a hill, you actually have to go quite far. And we shot this shot about 3 times. Craig, my now husband, is behind the camera, and I was ridiculously sweaty by the time we got the shot right. So I'm just laughing at my own pain and anguish as I run towards the camera. Let's see what past sweaty Lena has to say about marriage.
So the 20s Toolkit is a series on my channel where I talk about the things that I learned in my 20s and the things that maybe you might want to think about while you're in your 20s. Now for me, marriage had to be an episode in this series, just because I really strongly believe that you need to know what you think about marriage when you're in your 20s, or at least you know what your questions are. The other thing that you might be thinking is, Lena, why are you covering marriage for a 20s series? Your 30s are for getting married. Well, maybe for you.
And for me too, it would seem.
My best mate from down the road got pregnant when we were 15, and pretty much all of my friends kind of were married by the age of about 23 and definitely on the baby train. Myself, I was actually engaged at 22, but I did back out of the wedding, which is an entirely different story for an entirely different day.
And that day will probably never come, but glad to know that I've immortalised it on the internet. Marriages are like ancient romantic love-themed ceremonies. So, yeah, unions between people have been going on for like thousands of years, but not really specifically between men and women, not really between just two people, and definitely not specifically for love. If anything, they were more honour-themed, property-themed, status-themed events. Comparing marriages of the past with your average cake-topping, Western, British marriage is kind of like comparing a pteranodon with a nuthatch. Yeah, there's a vague origin story there, but they're not really the same thing. If you want my 2 cents, I think it's probably best not to get too precious about protecting the history of marriage, since even around the world it's been pretty different and in most cases not that ideal. Also, some customs that you might associate with marriage ceremonies, A, aren't that old, and B, aren't that deep. For example, diamond rings and weddings only became some kind of expectation after the 1947 campaign by De Beers. Diamonds are forever. Are forever, are forever. Before that, only 10% of engagement rings included a diamond. Oh, and white wedding dresses? Yeah, that was Queen Victoria. She wore it at her wedding, and after that very recent date, everybody wanted to copy it. Now, there are people I do want to draw inspiration from and copy, but I'm not sure if it's a colonial, perpetually miserable monarch or a ball-busting, exploitative rock business. Now, I'm not saying that having diamonds or white at your wedding is intrinsically wrong. It It's just that I'd call them more trends than traditions. And I think knowing stuff like that is a really helpful way of being able to remove yourself from the necessity to follow them. If you want that at your wedding, go ham. It's just important to not make a big deal out of it if other people don't want that, if it's simply a trend. I think we're really encouraged to picture the generations of women before us who did this beautiful symbolic thing that we can be part of, when in reality, anybody past your nan probably just threw on her favourite thing and didn't even get a ring. If we are going to do traditions, personally, I would love to see more localised traditions, to not see so many similar weddings, to really bring out family or regional based customs that really mean something to the people getting married.
What I said there about following traditions is really interesting, and the fact that most people just threw on a dress and took a few pictures. And it's true, because I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen a picture of my grandma's wedding. I might have seen one, and I've probably seen about 3 pictures in total from my parents' wedding, simply because there weren't that many pictures taken. And I only have a few pictures of my wedding because we eloped, and we didn't have anybody we knew at the ceremony, and the whole thing was 15 minutes, and then we went back to the hotel and got changed into our normal civilian clothes. So sometimes I think, like, God, it's weird that I don't have that much of a record of my wedding, but I'm like, I only have as much of a record as probably all of the other generations combined. Potentially I have more than all the other generations combined. And to have this normalization of like extreme documentation of your wedding day is very new and very lovely if people want it, but a good reminder that it's very new, and the amount of record that I have about my wedding is a very adequate amount.
Marriage is a step in building the perfect relationship. I really feel like the reality of it is that you're marrying the person they are now. You're agreeing to the relationship that you have now. There is this harrowing song in Guys and Dolls the musical that actually got cut from the film adaptation. I wonder why. Marry the man today rather than sigh in sorrow. Marry the man today and change his ways tomorrow. Shouldn't have to explain why that's toxic, and we don't have time here, but it does make me shudder to think of all the marriages happening up and down the country right now where people are marrying the person they wish their partner was, or who they think they have the potential to be, rather the person they really are and are showing themselves to be. It's not really fair on either party, and it's kind of cruel to marry somebody wishing that they were somebody else.
Take thee, Rachel.
When you get married, you're kind of not only saying the part in the vows that's like, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, you're also saying, in stagnation, in inaction, inconsistency, just as you are.
I totally agree with that still. I think that you do have to marry who the person actually is rather than their potential. But I also have, like, the fact that me and Craig have been together so long, I think about who we were when we started dating, and we're kind of like completely different people, both of us. So I think to add a layer to Pastelina's wisdom, you're also kind of marrying whatever version they become and trusting that they will change with you and that you'll like the next person. Or at least if you don't like the next person, you'll stick around for the next person. And there's lots about this in a book called Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, which is one of my favourite essay collections. So if you're interested in that concept, read that. But I have started to layer this thought a little bit. I'm not completely sure I agree. It's not a complete thought, Mini Lena.
Now this one is aimed at me. Not marrying makes me really rad and different.
Very cool, way to go!
Tom Rasmussen is a non-binary working class writer who's really helped me tune my own ideas about marriage. In their book, First Comes Love, they talk about realising that they had spent years attending weddings as the wild non-conformist who doesn't adhere to gender stereotypes, capitalism, and performative love that weddings sometimes do have in the air. But as they describe, exhausted, broke, and serotonin deficient, they also began to realise that willfully making abnormal choices doesn't make you not normal. And as glittering and wondrous as those years were, they screamed of performativity, the same way my friends' weddings did. All this time I was leaning into another expectation. The way they talked about performative wildness really reminded me that nobody is exempt from exaggeration and pretense. And it's only really the people involved who know whether what they're doing is based on something truly real. To think we're better than others for not marrying is a really dangerous road, and it's up to each person person to assess what they stand to lose and what they stand to gain from getting married.
This idea of like not getting married as a rebellion is really interesting, because I think that the way we ended up getting married is that we eloped and we didn't tell anybody. It was a complete secret. You can watch another video on my channel after this one if you want to get the goss on that. That is also like the way we got married was kind of a little rebellious, I guess, but also incredibly traditional. Like that is what a lot of people do, especially they used to go to Gretna Green. So I think we kind of did something very both conventional and not conventional, in that I don't know that many other people that have eloped in secret, but that doesn't make it like cooler. It just makes it something that suited us more. But I do also I've definitely had those thoughts creep in again, where I'm like, oh, that wasn't very, I've become so conventional in my old age, like after all these years of saying I wouldn't get married, like I've conformed. But then I don't think that's fair, and I think that I wasn't necessarily being a huge rebel by not getting married. It's just reconciling yourself with the fact that you are going to conform in some way, but making sure you're conforming to your own ideals and not rebelling against yourself.
You have to have a wedding to have a marriage. Okay, we need to divorce these two things. And to do that, we're going to need to talk money. An average wedding in the UK costs £31,974.
I bet that is way higher now. Great if that's higher, put it on the screen. Or it could be lower because the cost of living is worse. Either way, it's not good news, is it?
I think I speak for everyone when I say JFC, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you have it. But to me, money in my head, and probably quite literally, is still hours I've spent working, i.e. effort. So if 90% of the effort and resources are being pulled into a relationship at the very beginning and not drip fed in, well, that is a really wild business plan you've got going on there. Maybe it's a coincidence or the divine mystery of numbers, but £30,000 is actually dead on average what you'd need for a down payment on a house in the UK. And unless you're born into wealth or you live in a really cheap part of the country and happen to have a really great job in that very cheap part of the country, it's reasonable to expect that you won't be able to have both. There is a really fun Netflix series based on this theory called Mortgage or Marriage, and if you have some time to set fire to, I would highly recommend it. £31,974 is also the price of 639 marriage counselling sessions, 53 holidays away together, and if you're on the living wage, perhaps around 3,365 hours or 140 days you could take off work to rest yourself or be with that person that you're with.
I shock myself at the research that I have done and then forgotten, but those are some really harrowing numbers. And I talked a little bit about this in my last video, where I explained about eloping and like the difference, like the relationship between money and mental health, and like investing in your long-term self as well as your short-term self. And I didn't realise I'd already had that thought. And not only had I had that thought, but I brought the receipts. Especially the marriage counselling sessions. How fucking sassy of me, jeez.
Eco-friendly weddings are a new thing. At the moment, weddings in the UK produce 4,910 tonnes of single-use plastic every year, which is the equivalent of about 47 blue whales. But like most customs in late-stage capitalism, they're sold to us as traditions. Oh my god, so heritage.
This is really interesting because we did not set out to plan our wedding the way we did because it was eco-friendly. It just accidentally became that way. And you might think because I make videos on the internet about positive panic and the environment that would have factored in, but it was honestly like a secondary concern, like a kind of extra bonus that we weren't really going to waste that many resources. But then it's kind of like a thing where the more money, the more resources, the more pollution. So I guess like very like by accident. We did drive actually to Gretna Green. We didn't get the train, mainly because there wasn't really a great train option. And then also, like, even if we had got to Gretna Green on the train, we then were holidaying in Keswick, which again would have just been like a nightmare train-wise and really hard to get around by bus. So we definitely, like, I'm not going to say we had the most eco wedding ever, but if you do want to know what I wore and if it was secondhand, I'm making a video about that next week, and it might, if it's already live because you're watching this in the past, it will be linked up here. If you want to hear a little bit more about fast fashion versus Lena's wedding, then there is a video about that.
Marriage is an agreement between me and my partner. It's also one of the biggest legal contracts you will ever sign in your entire life. I've said this before, but something that makes me very wary of marriage contracts, at least in the country that I live in, is that it's not really a contract between you and your partner. If it was, your partner would be able to release you from it at any time, which they can't. We'll get to that. They would also be able to determine the terms of the contract.
This is so interesting because I did think about this in the lead up to the wedding, and like the idea that I was entering into a legal contract. And it's something that I became okay with, and I think I'll explain that a little bit more, but I was expecting there to be more terms and conditions in this contract. Like, it's incredibly short. You don't get shown what all the legal terms for marriage are, and like where all the like, you don't get like a booklet. It's just like, by the way, here are all the legal laws surrounding marriage and this is what you're signing up for. Like, they don't send you that. You don't get presented with that. It's just a very simple form. And like, registering to get married was complicated because we had to give our birth certificates and our passports. But apart from that, it was like weirdly straightforward given the gravitas.
Or have the power over how those things change. They don't. An extreme example of this is that in the UK, rape was legal within a marriage until 1991. In my lifetime. Now, there's no danger of that coming back imminently. So says everyone who lives in a seemingly peaceful democracy before all dictatorships take over, but...
Now that is dark. Past Lena, it's feeling more and more like that is the case. There's a man called Elon Musk who you think is just a nice man who makes cars. Anyway, we don't have time.
Maybe it's an extreme example, but if I get married, I plan to be married for like 50 to 70 years plus, and things can amp up quite differently as your life changes. As far as I can tell, there is nothing to prohibit governments in future bringing back laws like it that negate basic human rights of people within marriages that are afforded to people who are outside of them. Not to say that people outside of them won't also be treated like shit in a dictatorship. And it's not necessarily a reason to sack off marriage. If a government doesn't care about your welfare, being unmarried, I imagine, doesn't afford you too much protection. But these kind of thoughts are worth considering if you feel you are the marrying type and your partner is a little bit more hesitant. Patience is appreciated. Remember, you're not just asking them to get into a contract with you. You're also asking them to make a deal with them. And that takes... optimism.
This is actually something I quoted when somebody was like, oh, I thought you made a video about how you don't believe in marriage. I was like, I didn't say I didn't believe in it. I said that it takes optimism to marry the government. Have my feelings changed because when I was making this video, there was a Conservative government in power and now we have a Labour government in power? Slightly. But as you all know from the news, the Labour Party is acting quite a lot like the Conservative Party. So it's not as comforting as I was hoping, but I'm not going to lie, there is like a slight releasing of the buttock muscles, knowing that Jacob Rees-Mogg is not in the ruling party right now. But there is a good point that I'm making here in that I think some people, when they're in a partnership, if the other person doesn't want to get married, they take it really personally. And I think the legal concerns around the government and marriage and bodies and rights, particularly when it comes to women, is incredibly important. And I think people can be forgiven for being really hesitant about marriage, even if they love and want to commit to the person. And I think there needs to be more understanding about that.
If it doesn't work out, you can just get divorced. Oh, I got me again. If only it were that simple. I think a lot of perceptions of divorces come from celebrity weddings and then subsequent divorces, where stars seem to hop in and hop out wherever their personal choice leads. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. I'm going to come in with the numbers again. The average divorce in the UK costs £14,561.
Can I just hop in here? Because in this video I talk a lot about how much divorce costs. But did you also know, and I only learnt this the other day, you can't actually get divorced for the first year of your marriage. Like, you actually just can't. Like, it's not allowed. Which is, you know, totally fine. I'm not having any regrets. I'm having a great time. But again, something that I just didn't know. Like, people don't tell you that. That's not on the form. Like, at least when I have a contraceptive pill, they hand me a booklet of, like, all of the different ways that I could potentially die and all the things they haven't researched about it. You know, just a little leaflet. That'll be fine.
And since you have a 42% chance of being in one, you better factor that into your calculations. It also takes longer than you might think. There's a misconception that if you both consent to a divorce, then it's like a done deal. But we only just got no-fault divorce in the UK in June 2021. June 2021. June 2021. June 2021.
And they can take it away at any moment.
2021. Before that, unlike the US and a few other places, if both of you want out imminently, one of you had to blame the other on the grounds of adultery, unreasonable behaviour, such as violence or verbal abuse or desertion, even if it was amicable to begin with. If you want out, one of you is going to have to make something up. Otherwise, you're waiting between 2 and 5 years to split your assets, which usually results in either you having to live with the partner you want to not be with for at least 2 to 5 years, or you having enough liquid assets for one of you to be able to move out and live elsewhere. It's very stressful, especially for children involved, and it results in a lot of messy, painful divorces that could, in theory, have been very straightforward, compassionate, and not inflicted lasting emotional damage on both partners and children involved. It also meant that if you wanted to divorce your partner and they weren't having it, for whatever toxic reason, you have to stay married to them for 5 years. Consent. So all hail the Divorce, Dissolution and Separation Bill. Yay! But you know, the government giveth, the government taketh away. I think
the government giveth, the government taketh away. I think me and Pastelina would still get on. I think we're on the same page about so much. Can I also say, just from an aesthetic perspective, I am absolutely living for this Mother of the Bride hat that I think I got from a charity shop and immediately returned to the charity shop after using. And also note that I don't wear glasses in this video and there's lots of chops. That's because I wasn't uncomfortable wearing my glasses on screen and I thought that there was a reflection that was bothering people. But it meant that I couldn't read my notes without stopping halfway through a sentence and picking them up. I couldn't just glance at a screen and see what I was saying.
I can't see without my glasses.
And that is incredibly ableist of me. And these are like a site access tool. And I've made a video talking about my choice of glasses and to wear glasses again in videos, but I can't believe how much I can tell I'm struggling in this video and how much I can tell I'm squinting just because I didn't want to wear glasses in I'm in the workplace, let me wear glasses. Anyway, it's nothing to do with weddings. I just wanted a little rant about that.
you only gain rights when you get married. You don't lose any. As I said before,
Oh my god, I forgot. Like, what rights am I gonna lose? I don't remember what I say in this section.
marriage does make me nervous because you're not just tying yourself to your spouse, you're also tying yourself to your government. Along with the rape clause I mentioned, plus the scenes in The Handmaid's Tale where they turn off their credit cards comes to mind, and then they transfer people's bank accounts to their partners. And the real life reality that in the past and still today in some countries, if you have a husband, you couldn't get your tubes tied without his consent. Having said all that, perhaps I'm being paranoid. After all, human rights and marriage have a history as intertwined as peanut butter and jam. An example of this, I'm not trying to scare you, I promise. We're gonna get some happy stuff soon. An example of this is that if you're married, you lose the right to control your own will, even if your bank accounts are completely separate. In the US, you cannot disinherit your spouse, even if it's just innocently that you want to leave your money directly to your children, because of something called the spouse's elective share. In the UK, you can, but a spouse can still change the terms of your will after you die. I know. Also, in some countries, you automatically take on the debt and the credit score of your spouse. In the UK, you don't. However, if you get a mortgage with that person later down the line, if you individually want to apply for credit, they will look at your partner's credit history and then potentially decline you if it's really bad.
Thank you, Pasadena. I'd totally forgotten that. Not that it's an issue in my own life, but like, how weird. Although I would say the clause where it's like, oh, your spouse can change your will after you die, and like it's not all. I think that actually kind of might protect people as well, especially like women, if they've been out of the workforce for a long time and they don't have the same assets as their husband, and their husband dies, but their husband doesn't leave them the money, even though that they've put in all the. I actually see this in a different light. I actually think that law might be okay. You let me know in the comments, but I think that law might have a reason behind it that I didn't fully understand during this video.
Cool. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the human right to get married at all, which historically in the UK hasn't been given if you are A, working class, B, not white, or C, not cis or heterosexual. Some of the many examples of this I could give are old, new, borrowed, blue. For instance, in 17th century Britain, labouring class citizens were forcibly prevented from marrying, whilst over the pond, enslaved people were being denied the same. Then in 1753, when the law seriously started getting involved in marriage, even more restrictions started waltzing in, uninvited. Among other things, it required all legal marriages to take place in an Anglican church. Quakers, Jews and royalty were exempt, but all the other religions, including Catholicism, weren't, which among other things meant directly screwing over all of the Irish citizens, basically ruling all of their marriages illegal and any children born under them illegitimate.
How wild is that? This is the law that I'm talking about that actually created the tradition of Gretna Green, which is where we went and got married. How wild! Wild! I hate it. Love the choice of Christmas music here.
If you're a woman in a marriage with a man, you have nothing to worry about. Misogyny is over. Okay, I don't really think anyone actually believes that, but it's true that when I first got engaged at 22, I honestly didn't consider that marriage might impact me negatively in any way that it didn't my partner. After all, I was marrying a man who treated me equally. It was 2012. This was the stuff of the past, right? Not that simple. All the data I could find on this topic collected data on what they term heterosexual marriages, because of course they couldn't be bothered to collect data on by people in mixed orientation, visibly heterosexual marriages, even though that would have been bloody illuminating. But here are some of the imperfect facts that I have. This study suggests that across Europe, husbands live an approximately 1.7 extra years. However, being married to a man knocks 1.4 years off your life. Yikes. According to a Michigan study, husbands on average create an extra 7 hours of housework a week for women. Single women recover better from heart attacks than married women.
I would like to interject and say that if anything, I create housework for Craig. This is not my reality, although I respect the statistics, but I have to chuckle because it's not like that here. I am the gremlin.
Marriage has always been the same and always will be. Not at all. As we talked about at the beginning of the video, the introduction of love into marriage is something relatively new. Who is welcome into the marriage ceremony keeps fluctuating and depends on cultures. And there's now even things like sunset clauses which can extrapolate into sunset marriages, in which couples decide to get married for the duration of 10 years and then either recommit or consider it a job well done and move on. So marriages and how we do them will probably continue to change. It would be naive to think that they won't. There's also the argument that marriage is kind of a semi-necessity in late-stage capitalism, a pragmatic life raft against the unfairly rising tides. Tom Rasmussen floored me when they said this. Monogamy is a system which demands that we prioritise one other so that the state doesn't have to prioritise us. Monogamy, and by and large marriage, is a niftily constructed system which allows those in charge to neatly organise those that the state should care for. Marriage eases the state's responsibility to you. It means that when you get old, you'll have someone to care for you, or when you have a baby, there'll be people to take care of it. Thus we can work for each other, protect each other, nurse each other when we get old, all in our neat family units. And then we die and the state haven't had to do all that much to take care of its people. That's why non-monogamy is so frowned upon in the social sense. So call me a dreamer, but I'd like to see a society where everyone can afford to buy a house, raise children, be cared for in sickness and in health, and be loved and cherished, whether they end up with somebody or not.
And also that quote about monogamy being a tool of the state is something that we could totally fall into, and I don't think being married makes that true, but I think acting in this way that your marriage unit is the only one that matters and you shouldn't like extrapolate that into more community connected care is probably playing into the state's hands. Dark though, very dark.
Better late than never for us to come around.
In conclusion, marriage has a checkered past, a present that excludes and exploits a lot of people, and a future that could be great, or at least better, if both married and unmarried people put their heads together and were honest about what works and what no longer sparks joy. If you are married, I would love to hear in the comments what your pros and cons list was when you were deciding. And if you're not married, would you ever consider it? Especially if you grew up in a different culture to mine, I'd love to hear some of the pluses and minuses of how you understand marriage. For me, marriage definitely remains an act of impressive optimism. And if you decide to do it after researching it, I completely support you. Also, please invite me to your wedding.
It's just so funny because it feels like my past self is talking to me and being like, if you do decide to get married, I support you, but you are a mad, optimistic bitch. I'm a mad, optimistic bitch, really, Lena. It happened.
I am an incredible wedding guest and an even better hen-do attendee. But marriage isn't something to be entered into lightly. And what I do know is that your 20s is often a time when your life is in complete flux. Being married to the right person at the right time can make that decade of your life even better. Being married to the wrong one can make it 1,000 times worse. So I definitely think we need to have more open dialogue and education about marriage in your 20s. And I also wish that marriage wasn't so conflated with the rites of passage that we have in a lot of cultures and seen as an achievement rather than just what it is, a gift. And I wish that we as a culture made as big of a fuss about other milestones in our loved ones' lives. I don't want to deplete the fuss. I want more fuss. Redistribute the fuss. Spread the fuss around. Maybe one day I will either defeat or switch off all of these reservations in my head and do the deed, but it is not this day.
That ending ended me. I'd totally forgotten I did that. It is not this day.
But it is not this day.
It is now the day, Lena, but I completely agree with the idea of like redistributing the fuss. I feel like our wedding didn't have a lot of fuss behind it, and that's fine because we kind of designed it to not be a big fuss for people. But again, I talk about this a little bit in my video where I talk about the idea of eloping and like the pluses and minuses of it. But it is, I don't know, I just find the like how we celebrate each other and like what expectations we put on each other and how high and low the bar is at the same time. Really, like a really interesting thing I want to keep thinking about. This video was enlightening in that I often don't permanently know things. I research them, I know them for a little while, I write them down in a video, I tell other people, and then my brain bins them sometimes. So I actually learned a lot from that video, and I hope you did too. If you are married, let me know how it feels for you. I can't believe how much I both agree with my past self about the hesitations about marriage and also feel completely differently to my past self in that I'm like, look, you get to decide how good or bad your marriage turns out. The statistics are good, but they're not necessarily applicable to you, and opting out of it doesn't necessarily change anything. It's not that radical. I'd love to hear from you if you're married. I'd love to hear from you if you're not married but thinking about it or have dismissed it completely and don't regret it. It's just a really interesting conversation that I will probably continue to have now that I'm married and like see how the marriages in my friends and family's lives play out. I just think how we relate to each other and how we promise and commit to each other can be really beautiful and could be so much bigger and more ambitious, and it doesn't have to always be in a romantic context. And I'm excited to see how my life plays out believing that. Thank you so much much for watching this video. If you are curious about other wedding things about me, you can watch any of these videos. And if you're watching this in real time, next week, you can see my wedding dress. So tune in for that, Monday, 6 p.m. Or if you're impatient and you want to watch it now, but it's not out, you can join me on Patreon where that video is already available and you can watch it early. I will also be answering questions on my Patreon Discord about weddings at the end of this series. So if you want to ask me more questions, I will be over on Discord answering those whenever you want, at your beck and call. And thank you so much for joining me on this I like to change my mind journey. And I will continue to change my mind. That is my only commitment to you. Frogsnog out.